The
What are you
morning air
doing?
in Crestwood Heights carried that kind of silence only money can buy. Freshly trimmed hedges, sprinklers ticking in rhythm, driveways still wet from dawn. Every house stood immaculate, its paint an identical shade of white, the color of safety, of sameness, of quiet control. And then came the truck. A silver U-Haul rolled slowly down the street, its tires humming against perfect asphalt. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Someone's dog barked once, as if announcing what everyone already knew. Something different had arrived. Marcus Brown turned off the ignition, exhaled, and looked at his wife. Alisha met his eyes and smiled, the kind of smile that hides exhaustion. Behind them, their 9-year-old son Jamal was half asleep, clutching a box labeled Books and Dreams. "Ready?" Marcus asked. "Always," she replied. They stepped out into the quiet. To them, this house wasn't just property, it was proof. Proof that hard work still mattered. That 10 years of saving and saying yes, sir, in rooms where they were the only black faces had finally built something solid. 6 bedrooms, a wide porch, a neighborhood rated A+ for schools and safety. The American dream, printed in real estate brochures, and finally theirs. As they unloaded boxes, the curtains moved again. Eyes disappeared. No one waved. No one said, "Welcome to the neighborhood." By dusk, the house was half full of cardboard and half empty of warmth. That's when Marcus noticed the folded paper under the door. 4 words, thick black marker, jagged handwriting. "You don't belong here." He stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of crickets, trying to decide whether to tell Alisha. When he finally did, she read it, swallowed hard, and said, "Maybe they're just not used to us yet." Her voice trembled only on the word us. That night, the 3 of them ate Chinese takeout on the living room floor. Outside, the sprinklers whispered, like the neighborhood talking behind their backs. The next morning brought the same silence. Marcus waved to a man walking his dog. The man adjusted his leash and crossed the street. At school, Jamal introduced himself to the class. A few kids giggled when he said he liked chess. At work, Alisha told a nurse she'd finally moved into Crestwood Heights. The nurse raised her brows. "Really? There? Good for you." Small things, polite things, invisible cuts that still bled. That weekend, Marcus tried to host a small barbecue, an invitation taped to each mailbox on the block. Nobody came. Only one note appeared on his porch the next morning. "No offense, busy schedule." He told himself it didn't matter. People just needed time. But when Jamal came home one afternoon holding a crumpled piece of paper, a childish drawing of their house on fire, the words "Get out" scrawled underneath, the denial collapsed. Marcus drove to the school the next day. The principal listened with tight lips and said, "Kids can be cruel, they don't understand." It was meant to calm him, but the sentence landed like another brick in a wall already built high. Driving home, Marcus thought of his father's words decades earlier. "You'll have to work twice as hard to get half as far." He had believed progress had outrun those warnings. Now he wasn't sure. That evening, Alisha stood by the window, watching the sunset smear gold across the identical rooftops. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. Marcus looked up from the box he was unpacking. "About what?" "That we don't belong." He set the box down. "If we leave, they win. But if we stay?" He hesitated. "Then maybe we change something." It was the closest thing to hope either of them had left. Sunday came with church bells in the distance. Marcus mowed the lawn, sweat glistening on his skin, the only brown figure moving among still white houses. An elderly couple across the street watched him from their porch. When he finished, he waved. The woman waved back, a tiny gesture, barely noticeable, but it felt like sunlight. Alisha decided to visit the local clinic. Within a week, she volunteered for weekend shifts, offering free checkups for neighborhood kids. Some parents thanked her. Some didn't. But word spread the new doctor is kind. Change, she realized, didn't roar. It whispered the same way hatred did. One evening, as autumn crept in, there was a knock on the door. Marcus opened it to find Mr. Whitman, the gray-haired man who lived next door, the one who had never said a word. He held a basket of cookies, awkward and unsure. "I didn't write those notes," he said quietly. "But I saw them, and I stayed silent. I'm sorry." Marcus didn't know what to say. Whitman looked down, then added, "My son died in a protest back in '92. Since then, I stopped trusting people. All people." For a moment, time hung still. Then Marcus extended his hand. The old man hesitated, then took it. In a neighborhood where distance was tradition, a handshake was revolution. From that night on, something subtle shifted. Whitman began to wave when he saw Marcus mowing the lawn. A woman who once turned her head at the grocery store stopped and asked Alisha about volunteering. Jamal found himself invited to a birthday party, the first since they'd moved in. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was motion. And in America, motion itself was sometimes the miracle. By mid-October, the Browns had been in Crestwood Heights for 2 months. The mornings began to look ordinary. School runs, grocery lists, quiet evenings. But under that rhythm, something restless moved. Change always does. Marcus started jogging before dawn. The air was crisp, the streets empty, the sound of his shoes echoing through the cul-de-sac. On some days, a patrol car slowed beside him, its headlights crawling like suspicion. He would nod, wave, and keep running. After all, this was his neighborhood too. Alisha found her small victories at the clinic. Parents who once avoided her now scheduled appointments. Children laughed when she gave them stickers after vaccines. One afternoon, a little girl hugged her and said, "Mom says you're the nice lady who fixed my cough." It shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. At dinner, the three of them talked about school, work, small things, the kind of talk that keeps fear at bay. Yet every night, when the house went still, Marcus found himself listening for footsteps that never came. Because even in quiet, history has a sound. The tension in Crestwood wasn't unique. It was part of a much older pattern, one written into maps and mortgages decades ago. In the mid-1900s, America drew invisible lines around neighborhoods, marking which ones were safe investments. Those lines, called redlining, often followed skin color more than income. For generations, black families were told, by banks, by brokers, by the state, where they could and could not live. Crestwood Heights had been one of those A-rated zones. Good schools, low crime, 100% white. By 2025, the laws had changed, but people hadn't caught up. When the Browns bought their home, they didn't just move into a house. They stepped across decades of unspoken boundaries. Sometimes progress feels like trespassing. In late November, a small story about the Browns reached the local paper. Doctor volunteers to treat kids in Crestwood. The article was harmless, even flattering, but the comments online were not. Bet she's doing it for attention. Keep politics out of our suburb. I'm sure they're nice people, but why here? Alisha stopped reading after the third one. Marcus wanted to report it, but report it to who? Racism rarely leaves fingerprints. That weekend, their mailbox disappeared. No graffiti, no broken glass, just gone. Someone had unbolted it cleanly, leaving an empty hole in the ground. Marcus stared at the spot for a long time, then went inside and said nothing. Jamal, sensing the silence, asked, "Did we do something wrong?" Alisha knelt beside him. "No, baby. Sometimes people get scared when they see something new, but scared doesn't mean right." The following weeks passed with the slow rhythm of waiting. Then December came, bringing Christmas lights and tension wrapped in tinsel. Most houses glittered in white and gold. The Browns hung theirs in deep red and green, the colors of Kwanzaa, of heritage, of hope. On Christmas Eve, someone unplugged their lights, twice. Marcus reconnected them both times. And then came the night that would change everything. It was after midnight when Jamal woke to the smell of smoke. He shook his father's arm. "Dad, something's burning." Marcus bolted upright, ran to the window, and froze. In the front yard, a small wooden cross burned near the edge of the driveway. Flames licked the darkness, orange against white snow. For a moment, time slowed. Then instinct took over. He grabbed the garden hose, ran barefoot into the cold, spraying until the fire hissed into steam. Alisha called the police. Jamal stood by the door, crying quietly. When the sirens came, neighbors came too. Robes, slippers, confusion on their faces. No one looked directly at the Browns. No one said, "I'm sorry." The officer took notes, promised patrols, and drove away. The neighbors drifted back into their houses, doors clicking shut one by one. And just like that, the street returned to silence. But it was a different silence now, heavier, ashamed. For days, Marcus replayed the scene in his head, the flames, the faces, the cold indifference. He couldn't stop thinking about the irony. In a country that sold itself on freedom, a simple house key could still unlock fear. He stopped jogging, stopped smiling. He went through the motions, but inside he was shrinking. Every glance from a stranger felt like a question he didn't want to answer. Alisha tried to keep the house warm, to keep Jamal's laughter alive. But laughter doesn't sound the same when you know your neighbors watched and said nothing. One afternoon, she visited Mr. Whitman. She hadn't seen him since the fire. His porch smelled of coffee and regret. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "I should have done something that night. I froze." She nodded. "We all did." Then quietly, "You could help now." He did. The next morning, Mr. Whitman stood with Marcus in the yard, holding new wooden posts. Together they built a new mailbox, taller, stronger, painted black and gold. When they finished, Whitman wrote a single line on the side. "The Browns, our neighbors." That afternoon, the street looked the same as always. Same houses, same quiet. But something invisible had shifted. For the first time, Marcus noticed a car slow down, the driver waving as they passed. Later, Jamal came home smiling, talking about a class project where he and two classmates, both white, had worked together. Progress, maybe, or just decency rediscovered. But the night still carried memory. Every time Marcus locked the door, he saw the faint scar on the driveway where the cross had burned. Some marks never fully fade. They just learn to live beside forgiveness. Across America, stories like theirs rarely make the news. They're too ordinary, too uncomfortable. No protests, no camera crews, just quiet acts of endurance. For generations, Black families have learned to navigate that quiet. The soft racism of suspicion, the loud echo of being the first, the only, the different. And yet, every time one of them stays, buys a home, sends a child to school, joins the board, runs for office, they redraw the map. The Browns were not activists. They were not heroes. They were a family who wanted what every family wants: safety, dignity, belonging. And in their persistence, they uncovered a truth America keeps forgetting: that equality doesn't end with laws. It begins with neighbors. Spring arrived quietly, the way forgiveness often does, without announcements, just warmth where cold used to live. The snow melted, revealing grass that hadn't seen color in months. Children rode bicycles again. Jamal was one of them. From their porch, Alisha watched him race down the street beside two neighborhood kids. Their laughter rang through the air, and for the first time since they moved in, she didn't worry who might be watching. Inside, Marcus worked at the dining room table. The wall above him held a framed picture of that rebuilt mailbox. It reminded him daily that even burned wood could become something stronger. The fire had changed more than just their yard. It had changed the conversation. Mr. Whitman started a community forum. Nothing formal, just coffee, chairs, and uncomfortable honesty. Neighbors who had avoided the Browns now sat across from them, listening, sometimes crying, sometimes arguing. People shared stories. A teacher who admitted she'd crossed the street out of habit. A young couple who confessed they'd worried property values would fall. It wasn't easy. Healing never is, but it was real. Alisha spoke at the third meeting. Her voice was steady, gentle. "I didn't come here to prove anything. We moved here because we believed this street could be home. And every small act of kindness since that night, every hello, every smile, has proved we were right to believe that." Silence followed. Not the cold kind from before, but the thoughtful kind. The silence of people beginning to understand themselves. By summer, Crestwood Heights looked the same, but felt different. The Browns hosted another barbecue. This time, people came. Kids chased each other through sprinklers. Someone brought potato salad. Mr. Whitman, wearing his old baseball cap, told stories about his son and how grief can harden the heart if you don't let the light back in. Marcus grilled ribs, sweat on his brow, a grin he hadn't worn in years. Alisha laughed with a group of women who once looked through her. Jamal ran circles around everyone, squealing with joy. Later that night, when the guests left and the yard grew quiet, Marcus sat on the steps and looked at the rebuilt mailbox gleaming under the porch light. He thought about his father again. The warnings, the wisdom, the weight of survival passed down through generations. And he realized something his father never had the chance to. Staying could be its own form of protest. Months turned into a year. Alisha joined the neighborhood board. She pushed for community scholarships, diversity programs in local schools, and a project to rename one of the side parks after a Black teacher who had lived nearby decades earlier. Some resisted at first. Some didn't understand why it mattered. But change rarely asks permission. At the annual meeting, when the motion passed, she smiled, a quiet victory measured not in applause, but in possibility. Marcus started mentoring young engineers from underrepresented backgrounds. He told them, "Success isn't just making it out. Sometimes it's about making a place worth staying in. But beneath their personal victories, the story of the Browns echoed far beyond Crestwood Heights. Across America, new families were crossing their own invisible lines, moving into suburbs that once shut them out, taking seats in rooms that once ignored them, claiming space not through confrontation but through presence. Sociologists began calling it the quiet shift, small, persistent acts of integration powered not by policy but by patience. For every protest that shook the streets, there were thousands of silent revolutions happening behind front doors, over backyard fences, in PTA meetings and neighborhood chats. The Brown story became one of them, a reminder that justice isn't only won in courts. It's lived, day by day, in the courage to exist where others think you shouldn't. One autumn afternoon, a local journalist came to interview Alisha for a piece titled Belonging, The New American Story. She asked what she had learned from the last 2 years. Alisha thought for a moment, then said, "That belonging isn't about everyone liking you. It's about knowing who you are even when they don't." The reporter asked Marcus what he hoped for Jamal's future. He smiled, that he never doubts where he stands. Time moved on. New families moved into the neighborhood, some black, some Asian, some Latino. No one sent them notes. No curtains twitched. Kids just knocked on doors asking if Jamal could play. The street didn't lose its quiet, but the silence had changed its meaning. It was no longer a wall, it was peace. On the second anniversary of the fire, the Browns invited the whole block for a candlelight walk. They started at their mailbox and ended at the small community park, now bearing a new sign, Whitman Brown Unity Garden. Under the soft glow of candles, Mr. Whitman, now frail but smiling, said, "2 years ago I thought the fire showed us who we were. Turns out rebuilding showed us who we could be." Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "We built this together." Alisha looked around, at faces once closed now open, at children playing without history's weight, and felt a quiet certainty. They belonged. As dusk settled, Marcus sat once more on the porch, the same spot where everything had begun. The cicadas hummed. The air smelled of jasmine. Inside, Jamal's laughter drifted through the open window. He thought about how strange the journey had been, from fear to understanding, from isolation to community. It hadn't happened overnight. It had taken burnt wood, broken pride, and 100 small acts of grace. He realized that belonging is never given by others. It's something you decide for yourself first, and then build around you until the world catches up. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, "We belong here." And in the distance, a chorus of porch lights flicked on, one by one, up and down the street. Ordinary lights, in ordinary houses, glowing against the evening. Each one, a quiet promise that maybe, at last, America was learning what it really means to be neighbors.